Hey. Welcome back to another episode of the Franchise Edge podcast, brought to you by Scorpion. I'm your host, Jamie Adams. And this week, I'm really excited to bring you a conversation with Jennifer Herskind. Jennifer is the CMO of Propelled Brands. Propelled Brands owns Fast Signs, Nerds to Go, and My Salon Suite. So basically a family of B2B brands in the franchise industry. I really enjoyed the conversation with Jennifer, and you will too. In this chat, we talked a little bit about her approach to marketing. She's got a great nugget that you're going to want to hear about on how she thinks about marketing from a demand generation perspective versus brand building. We talked about RFP processes. We tell a little story of my experience in an RFP process. And she talks about how she thinks about RFPs and the value they add to decision processing and hiring suppliers and vendors. We talked about an experience that she had with Drew Brees when she was at Smoothie King. And then we talked about what makes teams successful, what makes franchises successful. Again, some great nuggets you're going to want to hear about. So with that, I will jump into the podcast. Thanks again for joining. And of course, if you're interested in having a conversation with Scorpion, please reach out. You can find us at scorpion.co. And we look forward to talking with you soon. Take care. Okay. So Jennifer, it's true story here. Okay. Every time I'm in my home office, which is where I am today and where I typically record this podcast, every time I'm in my home office and I have a call with you, either on a go-to meeting or a Zoom, I get a little bit PTSD. You have any reason why that may be?
I don't know. Why don't you tell me, Jamie?
Okay. So during the pandemic, I had started adding this room on in my house to have a home office. It just so happened that it was not timed. But when the room got finished, I was so excited because I had a place an office space that was carved out. And the first call I ever had in this office was your RFP call. You remember the RFP call?
I remember the RFP call.
You do. Yeah,
I remember the RFP call.
I mean, PTSD. I mean, I've been through a lot of RFPs. That was like the first call of that RFP. I was like, holy cow.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah. It was, here we are. I think it's interesting, right? I think part of it is because you guys operate really differently than most other agencies and you don't fit into the same mold, which is great, right? Which is why we're here today. Because we wanted something different and not, the same mold that everybody else is doing. But I think that caused a little friction in the process as we were going through it, because you didn't fit neatly in the box and in the spreadsheets and the calculations, and your CFO wasn't present, and
that's right. I forgot about that part.
All the things.
I forgot about that. I forgot about the CFO comment.
Because how, Jamie, could you possibly make decisions, without your CMO or your CFO involved?
Yeah. You got revenue in your title, not finance in your title. Yeah. That's great. Well, here we are. And look, and honestly, this is the third episode of the Franchise Edge podcast that we've done. And in full transparency, you're the first actual franchise or customer that we've had on. Okay. So I count myself fortunate to have you as that guest.
Excellent. Thank you.
I appreciate it. So we're talking about RFPs. I can tell you that as a supplier and being in the industry as long as I've been in the industry, one of the things that I think I loathe, and I probably speak for most people on the supplier side, are RFPs. Yep. But I do understand from a customer's point of view the necessity to do those things sometimes. So can you just tell me a little bit about your perspective on RFPs and how you think about those and when you're making certain decisions in marketing at Fast Signs and Propelled Brands?
Sure. Yeah. So they are well hated across the industry. And I think because a lot of times it feels like a waste of time, or it can be a waste of time. So I think it's really important if you're going to go through an RFP process that you are very selective, that you've really narrowed it down to the people that you think can impact the business. It's not about casting a wide net and having, 10 agencies run through the ropes of, putting their best foot forward and courting you and going through the process. I think it's important to, get that list narrow to make it really worth everybody's time, yours and theirs. But I think it is really important to have that consistent process to evaluate partners. I think I joke all the time, you hear, especially in marketing, the stories of the CMO that brings all of his or her people with them and their agencies, and wherever they go, they're just followed by their by their band. And
Yep.
I think you got to really step back and understand and evaluate what every company needs, and have that fresh and independent perspective in each position. And sometimes that means, stepping out and identifying partners that you might not have had in other places. But I think it's about, involving the key stakeholders in the process, making sure that you're sharing the process and that you're sharing that selection criteria, that you really do have the right selection criteria in place. I approach it, I never want it to be my opinion, right? And so, especially as we were talking to you guys, we had some history previously, although we weren't able to work together in a previous job I was trying to bring you guys in on. And you have relationships with our CIO and others, in our company, but I felt it was important for my credibility, for your credibility, for, the company, to make sure that, we shared with our franchisees the process we made, because it was a really big deal, especially in our business with the Fast Signs accounts. I mean, we have like 700 individual local franchisees accounts that have to be moved, that has to be changed, that the franchisees have to go through and, understand the new strategies and new dashboards and all of that. So it was a significant shift, and we didn't want to take it lightly. And so we thought that the RFP process gave us that structure and that framework to do it the right way.
Yeah. And I think another thing that I just, again, perception of being on this side of the fence, right, is anytime you get an RFP or you hear RFP, right, the first thing that always comes to mind, right, is like, okay, this is just a way to squeeze out price, right? And, you mentioned a second ago, selection criteria. So just high level, I know it's been a minute since you've done an RFP. I hope that you don't do another one anytime soon. But can you just give the listeners like a little bit of guidance on how you think about just high level selection criteria when you're going through an RFP? Because I do think that's important.
Yeah, it is. And it's certainly going to vary depending on, what part of the business you're putting up and trying to solve for. But I think it goes back to, you have to start with your goals and objectives, right? You got to clearly understand where your roadmap is and what you're trying to achieve. And then, figure out if the partner that you're talking with, has the capabilities, tools, people, to align with your strategy. So I think it's strategy, it's people, it's obviously prices in there, but it's really not price, it's value, right? Am I getting the most value out of this? Because you can always find somebody to do it cheaper, but that's not what it's about, right? It's about what are you getting out? How are you able to move the business forward? I think one of the great things that happened when we were doing this with you guys and with the other players that were in the mix was you guys fed back to us in the process exactly what we were asking for and demonstrated that you understood our business objectives and what we were trying to achieve, and then even had fun with it, right? I remember you guys coming to the table with all your animal personalities, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But
I want to give credit to Patrick Crawford on our team for drawing that out. You know Patrick quite well now, but yeah, that was all Patrick's idea for sure.
Yeah, but I think it's not just about paper. Right. It's not just about what's on the paper. I'll give you a little bit of experience from a prior job. I was doing a creative RFP, and we had two agencies down at the end, and one had, good creative, but we were so aligned strategically, and we had great connection from a team standpoint. And the other agency, good connection, not the same. And, strategy was there, but it wasn't, as harmonious as it was with the other agents, but the creative was really great. So we ended up going where the creative was. And I regret it every day because I would have rather, you can always get the creative there, right? Yeah. But if you don't have that strategy and that great thinking and that team connection, you're not going to get there long term, right? It falls apart at some point.
Yeah.
So I think that's the most important thing. So, it could be the creative, it could be the price, it could be, another factor that you're thinking, that's going to be the decision maker. But I think it comes back to the alignment is the most important for long-term partnership.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you talked about, you kind of jumped into previous roles. So you've been in senior marketing positions for a really long time now. One of the things that I took notice about you when I met you several years ago was, you're not really one to jump around very often. Like most of the roles you've been in for 6-7 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there may be an exception or two, but whereas in franchising, you actually, at least from my perspective, you see some revolving doors, right? You see like a lot of executives that are in a role for a couple of years and then they move on for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But you've got some great brands in your background, like specifically Gold's Gym and then on to Smoothie King. So I want to go back to Gold's Gym a little bit because that's a really big iconic brand in the fitness industry. What were some learnings, at that point in time that you maybe took from there and then you were able to apply as you went into Smoothie King and even now at Propelled Brands and Fast Signs?
Yeah. Let's see. I would say it's about results, that results matter, right? That as much as you can as a marketer understand the whole business is really important. At Gold's Gym, we were run by a private group. So it was like private equity, but, independent and really finance driven. And that was hard when you're running an iconic brand like Gold's Gym. And it's like, well, you got to get the numbers and what is this doing for me? And if I put this out. So really being able to get to the ROI, to the business understanding, the business impact, to build the case, I think is important. It goes back to knowing the audience, knowing who your stakeholders are and knowing the audience. So I think that was really important.
Yeah, it makes sense. And then you jump from Gold's Gym, you go to Smoothie King, another iconic brand, especially I'm a Louisiana guy originally.
Yeah.
Smoothie King for a long time was headquartered down in New Orleans. Lots of affiliations with iconic Louisiana sports figures, Drew Brees, who we all know has a big stake in the franchise space today. It was a keynote at the IFA this past year. But you got to work with Drew Brees at Smoothie King a little bit. So just a story or two of Drew Brees and what that was like.
Oh, wow. Okay. So we were trying to shift the Smoothie King brand and positioning to a healthy, active lifestyle brand, not a sweet frozen treat. And so, leaning into health and fitness and sports, was an important component of that. And we were trying to determine who a spokesperson could be. And I can remember going into the holidays, an agency shut down notoriously over the holidays, right? We're heading into the holidays and I'm told we're signing Drew Brees and you can film him on January 2nd or May, whatever, right? Those are the 2 days he's available. So you're going now. I'm like, what? Wait, hold on. Like, we don't have the strategy. We don't have the concepts. We don't have anything. What are we going to film? Right. So literally spent that Christmas holiday with agencies on ski slopes, pulling over to do calls in, the cabins, on the mountain, et cetera, to figure it out. And I remember it was the day before and we did not have clearance through his agent on what we were trying to record. And I'm like, I have a team of people all flying into New Orleans. We have one shot at this, not inexpensive, right? And one day to film, and we've got to be aligned. And I literally almost canceled it, right? Because 24 hours ahead of time, I'm like, what if we don't get what we need, right? If we're not aligned and they haven't bought off on it yet. So anyway, it came together overnight. We all got on the plane in the morning. And I remember Drew walking in and, we sat down to brief him on what we were trying to accomplish. I'm like, hey, here's some key talking points. And it wasn't scripted, right? But we wanted, certain key points for him to communicate, about what it means to him for the smoothies and the nutrition and how it benefits his life, et cetera. And so I remember going through it and he's like, yeah, I got it. I'm like, okay, well, I mean, we can, let's go through this one more time, so I'm trying to make sure, it's like 3 minutes of briefing and he's like, got it. And I'm thinking, okay. So I tried 2 more times and he's like, I got it. And I go, okay. And we went out and we got on film and I'm sitting kind of in the back, in the little green room area and they film. And after there's, they kind of finish the first clips, they go, hey, Jennifer, you good back there? And I go, I think we got it. I mean, it was like, week. And so, we did a whole bunch more just to, for variety and to have a lot more in the can. But, I guess the learning is, hey, if you're quarterbacking an NFL team and, you've got how many plays memorized and you can pivot at any given point when something's not, showing up the way you thought you'd see it. I mean, he had it. He didn't need me telling him anything. It was hysterical.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a great observation. That's actually one of the things I pull out of that story is, when you hire someone of that caliber, that's clearly a professional, right? They've got all these reps of preparation, right? That may not even be specific to anything that you're doing in your business, but just the reps of prep and the confidence that yields and bringing that into a scenario like that is pretty special.
I mean,
awesome.
And I think, you can apply that, right? I mean, we all don't have Drew Brees on our team, but we all have, really high performers and strong team members. And, if you set the vision and give them kind of the guardrails and say, hey, this is the, space we want you to operate and this is where we're going. Go. Start running. Start running down the field, make it happen. So I think that was a great, takeaway out of that experience. I mean, certainly at a whole different level, but you don't have to micromanage. I didn't have to give him every detail, right? I had to give him that higher vision and this is the type of thing we're looking for. And he ran with it.
Yeah. So again, so let's go from Smoothie King to where we are today. Your Propelled Brands was just Fast Signs though when you joined. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. Yes.
Right. Yeah. So what was the pitch? Like, how did they land you there? Like, what brought you to the Fast Signs world?
It was the vision. So when you talk about setting a vision, it was the vision of building a portfolio company of, business to business franchising concepts and leveraging all the franchising best practices and expertise we have on the team to really propel brands forward. So I was on board for Fast Signs, but really exciting to be in a position where you can, lead marketing for more than one brand. And we have Nerds to Go now and My Salon Suite and, are still trying to add more brands to the portfolio. And it just makes it an interesting challenge every day.
Yeah. And you mentioned, you went from this really iconic B2C brand, right? Mm-hmm. That I think it's pretty safe to say, I mean, most people know about and probably, it's almost like the Starbucks of smoothies, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's how I think about Smoothie King. Again, a little bit biased because I'm from Louisiana, but and oh, by the way, my first job in college was at a Smoothie King. I don't know if
no way, really? I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. Yep. Jordan Smith on my team now was my boss then at Smoothie King. I will freely admit that the only reason I worked there is because there were really cute girls that worked there, and there were also cute girls that visited the store all the time because it was right off campus at Louisiana Tech.
Can't fault you for that.
Shout out to Sean Cangelosi, who was the franchise owner of that Smoothie King at the time. But now you're Fast Signs, very, very different business, B2B, also quite large, the largest player in y'all's space. How did you approach media planning and marketing coming from a B2C brand like Smoothie King, and how did you transition, your skills into a B2B environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little different. I think the same, marketing principles apply. You just have to adjust for your audience. It's not as easy to do lookalike targeting as it is in a consumer space.
Sure.
But I think, it all goes back to what I like to call, the seesaw of capturing demand and building brand.
Yep.
And so I think, you have to do the lower funnel capturing demand that exists. It's the easiest, cheapest, highest ROI thing you can do is capture a customer who's looking for you already or looking for your products and services. The harder thing is to build the brand, for the longer term and build that future prospect, that future customer. And so I think the danger that we all can easily fall into is, well, I have all these metrics. I know this is working over here, right? I've got, reams of data on some of these lower funnel tactics because they're highly attributable and you can get a lot of, information about them, but you have to build the brand for the long term. And so you got to get upper funnel. You got to figure out where that balance is. Short and long-term strategies to require different media. And so, for Fast Signs, we are on national television, and we've started doing a lot of upper funnel display and Meta and YouTube through our digital media with you guys. So you've got to create that balance. I think importantly, especially in times of uncertainty, like we've gone through with pandemic and now, I don't know what we are. Are we in a recession? Are we in a soft landing? Are we on the verge of a massive recession? Like, who knows? But in times of uncertainty, building the brand is even more important. And the brands that maintain spend or add spend during this time and focus on the brand benefit are in a better position and in a more profitable position coming out of these times than those that don't. So I think that the trap can also be to fall into discounts and promotions and those types of things, but building that brand benefit is that long-term health.
Yeah, you said a few things there, and I want to maybe dig into a little bit more. First of all, just the way that you framed kind of the role from my perspective of marketing in a business, right, is to do. I just love you put this so simply: capturing demand and building brand. Mm-hmm. Those are like kind of the two big buckets, right? Yep. So one of the things that I remember whenever this was pre-PTSD and the RFP process. And also pre-pandemic.
Now, you need to stop and tell everybody that I'm the only client that you've received a very nice gift from. So I did make up from the PTSD, right?
You did send me a very nice bottle of bourbon after it was all said and done, which usually you're, as the supplier, you're not the one on the gift
on the receiving side. Yes.
So I very much appreciate that. No, but one of the things that I do remember in one of our earlier meetings at Fast Signs at the office before the pandemic was you had this huge laminated media calendar for the year. Mm-hmm. Right? Like I don't know if you remember. Yeah, it was like massive. It was like a big laminate. Where you had kind of like your offline buys, your creative themes, your digital buys. It was really incredible. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like it with any other company that we work with or have worked with in the past. But how do you think about when you're going through a planning period, at the beginning of a year or any time, but usually, brands of your size, you go through kind of a planning period for the upcoming year in Q3, Q4 the previous year. How do you think about media planning today in a way where you are doing the things you just described? You're allocating a certain budget to capturing demand, and you're allocating a certain budget to building the brand. So how do you think about the buy? How has that maybe evolved over just the last couple of years in terms of maybe shifts that you've made on demand to building brand or vice versa? Yeah. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it all goes, you have to start with your objectives, right? What are you trying to achieve? What's the most important thing? We clearly set out and said for Fast Signs that driving quality leads to centers was a cornerstone objective for us from a marketing perspective. And so then you go, okay, well, what does that mean? How do we do that? And historically, we had been fully vested in PPC. Really the only thing we were doing outside of that to do any brand building was the television. And we have a national ad fund. So we had national ad fund contribution into PPC, and then we had local centers spending their local media dollars in PPC. And so, we started to make a shift, especially this year in this last planning process, to say, hey, the ad fund is really here to do the things for the franchisees that they can't do effectively on their own, right? I think all franchisees can invest very easily in PPC. It gets harder and more costly and less attributable to get into the higher level tactics of brand building. And so we've started to make a shift to say, hey, we're moving the national ad fund dollars into these higher level tactics, and we're going to let the franchisees do the demand capture of that, demand that exists for our products and services and for the business. And so that's a real shift from where we've been. And, our seesaw had been, completely unbalanced with almost everything in the short-term activation. And so now we're trying to even that out and have the ad fund do the heavy lifting for the system, right? Of doing the heavy brand building lift and even that out. So, we're doing it very carefully. We're stair stepping it to make sure we don't shock the system or have a significant drop off in lead volume, and allowing that, omni-channel and that upper funnel to build and, drive that volume for long term.
Yeah.
It's a longer term play, right? It's a longer term play.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I've always felt like that's the right thing to do, especially for brands that are, that have, look, you guys have kind of gone through the difficult part of, showing scale in your business. You've got 700 owners now, more locations than that even. So the business model has more than proven itself. And I do, I've seen like over time, just in the time that we've worked together, how the network of franchise owners have come along, and they're making those bigger bets themselves on capturing demand locally. Right. And that, again, that frees the dollars up at the ad fund level to do some more of that brand building. Yeah. I think, one of the things, go ahead. Sorry,
I was going to say, it evolves, right? It evolves over time, and it evolves based on the stage of business that the business is in, right? So, an emerging concept might not be able to do that, right, is what they have to really focus on. God, we got to capture as much of that demand as we can. So that seesaw and that balance changes based on the life stage of the brand. So that has to really be taken into consideration.
Makes sense. So I think a big part of you mentioned shocking the system, right? Not introducing too much change too fast. From my perspective, one of the reasons that you all have been pretty successful in making some of these shifts is because of the relationship that you at corporate and your team specifically has with your franchise owner group, and how they lock arms, and your franchise owners feel like, sometimes in franchise you have scenarios where I've observed where there's almost sometimes a contentious relationship between franchise owners and the big bad corporate people. I don't see that as often when I interact with folks at your brand. I think that's because of the way that you've assembled your team and you've aligned them to how they communicate with franchise owners on how you want to help, how corporate wants to help. So how do you think about building a team at Fast Signs in your marketing group? Just again, tell the listeners a little bit. Again, you guys have a lot of scale, but how's your team organized today? How do you think about building the team? What attributes do you look for? Give us some feedback there.
Okay. I think when you're in franchising, you have to have people on the team who understand franchising and understand what it means, right? To not be in a corporate environment and be in an environment where you have individual owners who this is their livelihood, right? It's not like, oh, well, sales weren't so great last month or last year or whenever. It's like, it's their make it or break it, right? So you have to take that really seriously. And so we want people to understand that. And you have to be somewhat selfless, I guess, in that regard, right? It's franchisee first. And I think we do well, and we have a strong positive relationship with our franchisees because our number one, we have several priorities for them, but it's about their profitability, 100%. Right. And franchisees who are making money are happy franchisees. So it's all about the profitability. So I think, if you're in franchising, you got to start, you have to have people on your team that have that same focus on making sure that the franchisees will win. And then I look at it and I think, I hire for soft skills. We talked about this a few weeks ago at an event. And it's like, does somebody have the drive? Are they competitive? Do they have the will to win? Are they curious? What are those soft skills that you need in your business to be successful? And then teach them the job, teach them the company. I would bring somebody in here that had 100% no sign and graphics experience. That's not what it is, right? I spent my career bouncing around from industry to industry and, corporate and franchise, and you bring those soft skills to the table, and I think that's what really makes you successful. You can learn the company, you can learn the business. So I've got a team here. We have 5 directors. We have dedicated marketing services managers, and then, kind of each marketing discipline covered, and we're creating that from a shared services perspective so we can support, all the brands that come on board under Propelled Brands. But I think as you're building the team, it goes back to what we were talking about and working with Drew Brees. You got to set the vision, right? Set the vision, set the guardrails, give people the accountability and responsibility to do their job. Nobody wants to sit around and wait to be told what to do, right? And so I always say I would rather be pulling somebody down, off the ladder who's climbing over the fence and, running for the hills to make something happen than be behind them, kicking them uphill, right? It's like I'll reel you in all day long, and kind of redirect and guide you in the right direction. But, it's like, if you're running, let's run. We're all running to win.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that's your team specifically. And thanks for sharing, the detail too on just kind of the makeup and some observations about their roles and responsibilities. But one of the other things that's pretty unique about the team at Propelled Brands is that you all are a very largely woman-led organization. So obviously Catherine's the CEO, Catherine Monson, everybody knows her. You got Andrea, who's the president of the Fast Signs brand now. You're the CMO across all the portfolio brands. What's that like? Is that new in terms of your history, your career trajectory? Is this the first brand that you've worked for where there's so many women on the leadership team? What's it like?
You know what? That's probably a true statement. I think that probably is. I hadn't really thought about it, but that probably is. This probably is the first place where we've had so much senior, female leadership. I historically have been the woman on the men's teams, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if it's different. I think I think if you're focused on hiring the right person for the job, and you've got the right person in the seat, it shouldn't matter, who they are. And so it's really about making sure that right person, right seat, who gets it, wants it, has the capacity to do it, right? The old EOS model. And if you've got that going and you can have, candid conversations with each other, you will be successful. You'll move the business forward.
I'm actually quite happy that you said that. I was having a similar conversation with our people ops team, my people ops partner here at Scorpion, as we are continuing to kind of grow and evolve, and just about the right hiring profile for some specific roles. And that's always been my approach. Is like let's not make this about man or woman or gender or race or anything. So let's find the right person for the role based on the criteria and the responsibilities of the role. So. I appreciate you saying that. You mentioned though in your response, you talked about EOS. You all work with EOS, implementing that process and management model into the business. I think you work with Justin Mink. He used to work with me here at Scorpion, and I've worked with Justin for a really long time. Tell us a little bit about EOS. I know that's not really the theme of the podcast, but I also hear a lot about the success that businesses have when they bring that system in. So tell us a little bit about EOS and how it's being implemented and maybe some of the impact that you've seen so far.
Sure. So we have, as an executive team, been implementing it in our meetings and how we're managing the business for almost a year now. And so we are literally just rolling it out to the rest of the organization. So even tomorrow, we've got like a 5-hour immersion training session to get, all of our managers in the company understanding how to use it. But it's about getting everybody on the same page, right? And it helps bring consistency across an organization, a common language, a common approach to setting and achieving goals and holding everyone accountable, for getting it done. So we have seen as an executive team that we've become much more efficient in our time. We've become more effective in our conversations. I'm super excited to roll this out now to my direct reports, to get them used to it, to roll it to their directs and really have this go across the organization. It reinforces credibility and accountability. And good or bad. It depends which way you look at it. It exposes, people pretty quickly. You can't hide in it, right? So if you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, it's gonna, flesh that out pretty quickly, and then that gives you the opportunity to have those conversations of, is this the right person in the right seat, or, do we have a development opportunity, or, maybe it's not the right fit. So I think, it's going to be if what we've seen it do for our executive team rolls out across the organization, man, we're going to be having a banner year for years to come.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's awesome. Is this something that you see applicable or potentially rolling down in all the way into the franchise system, like to franchise owners, introducing, certain things to them and seeing how that could benefit their local business?
Yeah, it could be. And I think, there's a lot of management systems and processes out there that you can adopt. And we specifically did adopt EOS because of its applicability to a franchise model. And so, I think the key is for us to really hone it, within corporate. We have franchisees who are using it independently, who have jumped on board to help benefit their business. But there will definitely be things as this goes across the organization that we'll be able to take and, leverage across the entire system.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Just a couple, I just want a few more questions. I know I've kept you for a minute here, but I want to ask, just staying on the theme of franchisees, franchise owners for a moment. You all, again, just reiterating, you've got scale in your business. You've obviously, lots of years of success growing the brand, which means that your franchise owners, to your point earlier, large in part are driving good revenue. They're profitable. What are some attributes, though, of your best franchise owners? Like in terms of how maybe they think, what their personality's like, risks they're willing to take, or maybe bets their investments are willing to take in marketing that maybe other, less successful or maybe just not quite as successful owners are seeing. Like what are some of those like attributes of a great franchise owner from your point of view?
It's interesting. We were just talking about this the other day. Some of our best franchisees, they own the hustle, right? They own the hustle. So It's not about outsourcing. It's not about call centers. It's not about some of this other stuff. They know it's up to them to develop the business. And so they are not sitting back waiting for the phone to ring or waiting for that Google click, to get to them. They are, developing relationships in their community. They are visible. They're hitting the pavement. They are owning the hustle. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. It's
you're dropping such little memorable nuggets here. I mean, you got earlier in the conversation, you got capturing demand and building brand. Yeah. As you think about marketing, now you're simplifying. Like, what's a successful franchise look like? They own the hustle.
Well, I gotta give credit to our director of training and our Nerds to Go brand, because we were talking about that brand yesterday or earlier this week, and that definitely came out as a key attribute. You have to be passionate about it, right? You have to want to win, and so if you're out there making the business happen, that's important. The other thing in franchising is run the playbook. Like, you bought into franchising for a reason, right? You didn't put up, Jamie's, sign shop or Jamie's computer repair on the shingle. It's like, so follow the playbook. Our most successful franchisees will say, I do what corporate tells me to do. Right. Yeah. So now, are we perfect? No, of course we're not perfect. And we need that constant, feedback loop from the franchisees to make sure we're supporting them the right way and that we're evolving in the right way. So that communication is critical. But if you joined franchising, there's a reason. Yeah.
So wrapping up, maybe another question or two, something that you and I have talked a little bit about offline in different conversations, but just getting to know you the last couple of years, I know that you and your husband love spending time at your ranch on weekends in East Texas. You're a huge Green Bay Packers fan. You've got a house in Green Bay that you escape to occasionally to go see Packers games. I think you traveled to Europe last year to see the Packers.
Yeah.
I know we haven't talked about Aaron Rodgers' move yet, so we'll save that for another time. But, clearly, you're a busy executive. You're running marketing for a large and growing brand. You've got a big team. You've got lots of franchise owners. And clearly though, making time for things in your life and personal is also important. So how do you think about balance in those things? How do you apply balance in your life? And maybe what are some principles or some things that you've learned throughout your career that maybe helped you shift maybe from being a little, maybe, I don't know if you've ever over-indexed one way or the other. I certainly over-index to the career side a little too often sometimes. But how do you think about balance and just priorities from a personal and business perspective?
It's hard, right? I mean, there's no easy answer to this one. It's the constant struggle that we all deal with. I think at the end of the day, you got to work hard. You have to work really smart, and you have to give it your all, right? You got to do that. But there are times when, those boundaries can get crossed. And if you find yourself being compromised, your physical health, your mental health, your family, you do have to be able to step back and say, it's too much, right? I can't, there's only so much I can give. And I think that comes with finding yourself in the right supportive environment, right? So I think we've all probably been in situations where that wasn't there. The trust wasn't there. The support wasn't there. Knowing that your team members, your, boss, whoever it is, wherever you are in the company has your back is so important, to the commitment that you can and should give to the organization. And I've had to learn it the hard way. I mean, I found myself in a position at one point, actually literally saying to my husband every night when I went to bed, I go, I am so sorry. We'll get out of, we'll figure a way out of this, because it was having so much impact, and you don't realize how much you're bringing home. Right. So I think it's constant, but I think, you have to find yourself in the right environment. And if you're not, life is too short, they're out there, right? You don't have to be in those situations. And so take care of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I you mentioned an event we were at a few weeks ago. We were at, down at Google's office in Austin. We had an event that we co-hosted with Google that was really just meant to bring different franchise executives and executives from other kind of multi-location businesses in a place where we could, talk about things that are working, things that aren't working. Certainly how things like ChatGPT and AI are kind of playing into marketing these days, which is, we could spend hours talking about that. But I just wanted to call out that, you sat on a panel and there was a question that came up, and you kind of leaned into what you just talked about a second ago, which is, hey, take care of yourself. And, there are ample opportunities out there for people that do great work, that are committed. All the other things you said are necessary, right? Like to be if you want to grow in your career and you want to be awarded opportunities, those things do demand, certain responsibility and accountability. But, there's a way to go about that from a leadership perspective where it is appreciated, it's supported. And if you're not feeling that way, then there are other opportunities out there that you should go chase. So I thought that was super valuable, and I wanted to make sure that this particular audience had a chance to hear it. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah, good.
Well, look, we've almost at 45 minutes. I really appreciate the time. This has been a fun conversation. And to your point earlier, yes, the initial PTSD that I did experience in this very office from the RFP was, in fact, awarded with a very nice bottle of bourbon, which has since been drank. Is it drank?
It's been empty. It's been emptied.
It's been emptied. Yeah, it's no longer here.
Yes.
But I appreciate it, and I appreciate our business relationship. I also appreciate our friendship, and you're a great partner. And thanks for spending some time today on our Franchise Edge podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I think you just said it concisely and in a nutshell. It's about partnership, right? And you get out of any partnership what you put into it. And I think, we're kind of in a day and age where clients need to remember and learn how to be clients, good clients, right? And what that takes to get the maximum out of their partners. It's that old
I agree with that.
Out, right? I mean,
so true. So true.
I don't like that. I don't like that is not a suitable form of feedback, right?
Yeah.
Try again. Right. So it really is a partnership, and we value the the thinking and the strategy and the different approach that you guys have. That's why we came to you, and that's why we're here. So
yeah, well, I appreciate that. And by the way, we did not talk about, I did not put her up to say that at the end, just so we're clear. But I do appreciate you sharing that, and couldn't agree more. And onwards and upwards. And thanks again for taking the time today.
You got it. Thanks.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.